I'm 79 years old now, and my father has been dead for 8 years. I never got to say I was sorry. I just kept putting it off. I kept telling myself there would be time later, that I'd visit next spot, not because I didn't have the chance. I had 30 years of chances. That I'd visit next month, that I'd call on the weekend. That once things settled down at work, once the kids were older, once I wasn't so tired, I'd sit down with him and we'd talk. Really talk. And now he's gone. And I'm the age he was when I stopped trying. It didn't start with a fight. That's what people assume when I tell them this. But it wasn't like that. It was quieter than that. Quieter and worse. But when I was 26, I moved 4 hours away for a job. It was a good opportunity. My father understood. He even helped me pack the truck. I remember he didn't say much that day. Just handed me a thermos of coffee for the road and told me to drive safe. I said I'd come back and visit in a few weeks. I didn't, not for 3 months. And when I finally did, it was just for an afternoon. I was busy. I was building something. A career, a life, a version of myself I thought I was supposed to become. My father asked how I was doing, and I gave him the short version. He told me about the roof he'd been fixing, and I didn't really listen. I was thinking about the drive back, about the work I had waiting for me on Monday. I left after dinner. He stood on the porch and waved. That became the pattern. A visit every few months, then every 6 months, then just holidays. And even then, I was half present. I'd sit at the table and think about emails I hadn't answered. I'd check my phone. I'd leave early because I had an early meeting, or the drive was long, or the kids had school the next day. My father never complained. That was the thing. He never said, "You don't visit enough," or "You don't call." He just asked how I was, told me a little about his life, and let me go. I think that made it easier for me to keep doing it. If he'd been angry, maybe I would have woken up sooner. But he wasn't angry. He was just there, waiting. I convinced myself he was fine. He had his house, his routines, his neighbors. I sent him a card on his birthday. I called on Father's Day. I thought that was enough. I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do, taking care of my own family, working hard, providing. But I wasn't taking care of him, and he wasn't fine. When I was 43, my mother called and said he'd had a fall. Nothing serious, she said, but he bruised his hip pretty badly. She said he was slowing down, that he didn't get around like he used to. I said I'd try to visit soon. I didn't go. When I was 47, she called again and said he'd been in the hospital with pneumonia. He recovered, but it took weeks. I thought about driving down. I even looked at my calendar, but there was a project at work, and my daughter had a recital, and I told myself I'd go once things calmed down. They never calmed down. When I was 51, my mother died. The funeral was the first time I'd spent more than a day with my father in over a decade. He looked older than I'd expected. Smaller. His hands shook when he poured his coffee. His voice was quieter. I didn't know when that had happened. I thought that would be the moment. That I'd stay a little longer, help him figure things out, start visiting more. But I didn't. I went back to my life. And he went back to his house. Alone now, I called more after that. Once a month, maybe. Sometimes less. The conversations were short. He'd ask about the kids, about work. I'd ask if he needed anything. He always said no. I always believed him. When I was 56, my wife said we should invite him for Christmas. I said, maybe next year. It felt complicated. He'd have to travel, and he didn't like driving anymore. And our house was small, and I didn't know if he'd be comfortable. I had 100 reasons. None of them were real. When I was 61, one of my cousins called and said my father had fallen again. This time it was worse. He'd broken his wrist. She said he wasn't eating much. That the house was a mess. That someone needed to check on him. I said I would. I meant to. But weeks went by, and I convinced myself that if it were really urgent, someone would call again. When I was 64, my brother called. He lived even farther away than I did, and we barely spoke. He said we needed to talk about Dad, that he couldn't live alone anymore, that something had to be done. We argued about it, about who should handle it, about money, about what Dad would want. I said I'd think about it. I never called him back. When I was 68, my sister-in-law called and said my father was in the hospital. Heart trouble. They didn't know how bad it was yet. I got in the car and drove. For hours. The same drive I'd made when I was except now my back hurt, and I had to stop twice. And I kept thinking, please let me get there in time. I didn't. He died an hour before I arrived. I sat in the parking lot of the hospital for a long time. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the building, thinking about all the times I could have come, all the phone calls I could have made, all the Christmases I could have invited him to, all the Sundays I could have just driven down and sat with him, for no reason, just to sit. I thought about the last conversation we'd had. It was 3 weeks earlier. He'd called to tell me about a bird he'd seen in his yard. Some kind of hawk. He didn't know what kind, but it had been sitting on his fence for a while, and he thought it was interesting. I'd been distracted. I'd said, "That's great, Dad." And then I told him I had to go. I said I'd call him back later. I didn't. That was it. That was the last time I heard his voice. Talking about a bird. I didn't get to tell him I loved him. I didn't get to say I was sorry. I didn't get to ask him about his life, about what he thought about whether he was lonely, about whether he was proud of me, about whether he forgave me for all those years of not showing up. I didn't get to tell him that. I thought about him more than I let on, that I meant to visit, that I wanted to, that I just kept waiting for the right time. There was no right time. There was just time. And then there wasn't. At the funeral, people said he was a good man. They said he was kind, that he always helped his neighbors, that he never had a bad word to say about anyone. They said he talked about me, about my family, about how proud he was. I wanted to tell them they were wrong, that he shouldn't have been proud, that I didn't deserve it, but I didn't say anything. I just stood there and nodded and shook hands and accepted condolences for a loss. I had caused long before he died. I'm 79 now, the same age my father was when I stopped making the effort. I think about him every day. I think about the time I wasted, the time I thought I had, the conversations I'll never get to have. I think about how easy it would have been. A phone call, a visit, just showing up. That's all he wanted. For me to show up and I didn't. I can't fix it. I know that. There's no second chance here. No way to go back and do it differently. He's gone, and I'm still here, and I have to live with that. With knowing that I chose everything else over him. Not because I hated him, not because I didn't care, but because I thought there would always be more time. If you still have your parents, or someone you've been meaning to call, someone you've been putting off, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I don't have that right. But I will tell you this. You think you have time, you don't.